The wagon should never have survived the mountain trail. Its left wheel was cracked nearly in half, the axle groaned with every turn, and the exhausted mule could barely pull another yard. Beside the wagon walked a young widow beneath the blazing afternoon sun, her dusty blue dress soaked with sweat and her trembling hand resting over the child growing inside her. She had no idea that 5 rifles were already aimed at her from the rocky ridge above. The men hiding among the pine trees had been following her since sunrise, waiting for the moment when exhaustion would make her an easy target. Then another wagon appeared around the bend. Its driver was a broad-shouldered mountain cowboy named Elias Boone, a quiet 40-year-old man whose face looked as though the wilderness had carved every line into it. Elias had spent most of his life riding through the northern Rockies, delivering supplies, breaking wild horses and guiding travelers through trails where one wrong turn could mean death. The moment he saw the damaged wagon, he slowed his horses. But he did not look at the broken wheel for long. His eyes moved toward the ridge. Fresh hoofprints marked the loose gravel, and several disturbed stones suggested someone had recently taken position above the trail. Elias knew exactly what that meant. "Ma'am," he called, bringing his wagon alongside hers, "you need to come with me." The woman looked at him suspiciously. "I can't pay you." Elias shook his head. "I didn't ask for money." Her name was Abigail Mercer. She was 26 years old and had been traveling west alone since her husband Daniel died from pneumonia the previous winter. Daniel had left her a small land claim beyond the mountains, and Abigail had sold nearly everything she owned to reach it. She had believed the journey would be difficult, but she had never imagined it would become a fight for survival. Elias climbed down, moved her supplies into his heavier wagon, secured the exhausted mule, and reinforced the damaged axle with a spare piece of timber. Abigail climbed into the passenger seat. Beside him, just as the mountain suddenly exploded with gunfire, bullets smashed into the wagon she had abandoned moments earlier. Abigail cried out and covered her stomach. Elias snapped the reins. "Hold on!" The horses surged forward as bullets tore through branches behind them. 5 riders appeared on the ridge, and their leader wore a black coat despite the summer heat. Elias recognized him immediately. Virgil Cain, the most feared outlaw in the territory. Cain had robbed stagecoaches, settlers, miners, and ranchers for years. Anyone who resisted him often vanished into the mountains. Elias pushed the wagon toward a narrow canyon while Abigail held tightly to the wooden seat. "Will they follow us?" she whispered. "They already are." The wagon bounced violently over the stones. Ahead, Elias noticed an old pile of fallen pine trunks balanced above the trail. He remembered the place from years earlier. The logs were resting against a weakened section of hillside. Elias grabbed his rifle. "When I tell you, get down." Abigail obeyed without question. Elias fired once. The shot struck the supporting timber. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the entire pile collapsed with a thunderous roar, sending logs, dirt, and stones crashing into the canyon. Cain's riders stopped suddenly as the trail disappeared beneath the debris. Elias drove hard through the narrow passage until the gunfire faded behind them. Only when the canyon opened into a wide valley did he slow the horses. Abigail looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Why did you help me?" Elias remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he said, "Because years ago someone stopped for me when they could have kept riding." He offered no further explanation. By sunset, they reached Red Pine Crossing, a small settlement beside a cold mountain river. Abigail expected safety, but the town looked strangely frightened. Storefronts were shuttered, men carried rifles openly, and nobody stood outside the saloon. Sheriff Thomas Grady explained the truth. "Cain controls most of the mountain trails," he said. "He'll come looking for you." Elias looked toward the dark mountains beyond town. He had already saved Abigail once. Something told him Cain would not allow them to escape so easily. Sheriff Grady's warning proved true before the sun rose the next morning. Abigail had barely slept when the sheriff arrived at the small room where she was staying. "The doctor wants to see you," he said. "Your journey has put too much strain on the pregnancy." Abigail followed him to the clinic, where the town doctor examined her carefully. His expression became serious. "You cannot continue west yet," he told her. "You need rest. If you push yourself through another mountain journey, you could lose the child." Abigail lowered her eyes. Almost all her money was gone, and the thought of staying in an unfamiliar town frightened her. Before she could ask what she should do, Elias appeared at the door. He had already spoken to the owner of a small cabin near the river and paid for several weeks of shelter. Abigail stared at him. "You can't keep spending your money on me." Elias shrugged. "It's only money." "And what happens when you need it?" she asked. Elias looked toward the window. "Then I'll find more." For the next several weeks, Abigail slowly recovered. She helped local families by sewing clothes and repairing blankets while Elias worked around town. He fixed fences, hauled firewood, and helped Sheriff Grady patrol the roads. Their friendship grew quietly like a campfire protected from the wind. Neither spoke about what might happen after Abigail recovered. Then, one afternoon, an elderly traveler named White Elk arrived at Red Pine Crossing. He brought more than hides and herbs. He brought a warning. Virgil Cain had gathered nearly 30 men in the mountains. They were planning to attack Red Pine Crossing before winter and steal every horse, cow, sack of grain, and rifle they could find. Sheriff Grady looked at the handful of deputies under his command. "We can't stop 30 armed men," Elias answered. "Then we don't fight them with 5 men." He gathered the ranchers, miners, hunters, blacksmiths, and farmers. Everyone was given a job. Wagons were turned into barricades. Ammunition was stored in safe buildings. Horses were moved away from the main street. Women prepared medical supplies while older children carried messages between lookout posts. Abigail refused to sit helplessly in the cabin. Despite being heavily pregnant, she helped organize the medical station. "If they're coming for this town," she said, "then I live here too." 3 days later, the mountains began to shake with the sound of approaching horses. Dust rose beyond the western ridge. Then Virgil Cain appeared at the front of his gang. He stopped his horse and shouted toward the town, "Give me your horses and supplies, and nobody has to die." No one answered. Elias stood behind the wagon barricade with his rifle resting across his shoulder. Cain smiled. "You should have kept riding yesterday, Boone," Elias replied. "You should have stayed in the mountains." Cain raised his hand. The attack began. Gunfire thundered through Red Pine Crossing. Outlaws charged toward the barricades while defenders fired from rooftops and windows. Elias had chosen the positions carefully, forcing Cain's riders into narrow streets where their numbers meant little. Horses screamed. Wagon boards shattered, and smoke covered the town. For hours the battle continued. Then Cain noticed something that changed his strategy. Abigail's cabin stood near the river, away from the strongest defenses. Cain pointed toward it. "Take the woman," he ordered. "Boone will follow." Several riders broke away from the main attack and raced toward the cabin. Abigail heard the horses approaching. She looked outside and saw Cain himself riding toward her. Fear gripped her heart, but she refused to run. She picked up a rifle and stepped onto the porch. Cain laughed. "You really think you can stop me?" Abigail raised the weapon with both hands. "No," she said, "but I know someone who can." Cain turned. Elias stood beside the old river well, his rifle aimed directly at him. The outlaw slowly climbed down from his horse. "This ends today," Elias said. Cain smiled coldly and reached for his gun. Cain's hand moved toward the revolver, but Elias was faster. His rifle struck the outlaw's wrist, sending the weapon spinning into the mud. Cain lunged forward with a furious shout, and the 2 men crashed against the side of the old well. Around them, Red Pine Crossing continued to burn with the sounds of battle. Abigail stood frozen on the cabin porch while Sheriff Grady and 2 deputies rushed toward the river. Cain fought like a desperate animal. He was younger, heavier, and driven by years of violence. Elias had none of those advantages, but he had something Cain did not. He had a reason to win. Every time Cain attacked, Elias thought about Abigail, her unborn child, and the families hiding inside the town. The fight moved through the mud until Cain managed to knock Elias to the ground. The outlaw reached for another hidden pistol. Sheriff Grady saw the weapon first. He fired a warning shot that struck the revolver from Cain's hand. The deputies immediately tackled him. With their leader captured, the remaining outlaws began losing courage. Some fled toward the mountains, others threw down their weapons. By sunset, the attack was over. Red Pine Crossing was damaged, but it had survived. The people who had once been terrified of Cain now stood together in the streets, realizing they had defeated something far more powerful than a gang of criminals. They had defeated their own fear. Abigail walked toward Elias after the fighting ended. His shirt was torn and blood covered one side of his face. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Elias smiled faintly. "Nothing that won't heal." Abigail looked toward Cain being carried away in chains. "You could have left me on that mountain." Elias shook his head. "I couldn't." "Why?" she asked again. This time, Elias finally told her the story he had hidden for years. When he was a young cowboy, Elias had once been trapped alone in the mountains after a horse threw him. He had broken his leg and spent 2 freezing nights without food. An old rancher eventually found him and carried him to safety. That man had given Elias food, shelter, and a horse without asking for anything in return. Before Elias left, the rancher had told him one thing: when you find someone standing where you once stood, don't ride past them. Elias had carried those words for decades. Now Abigail understood why he had stopped for her. Months passed. Abigail's health improved, and the winter snow eventually covered the mountains. During the first heavy snowfall, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. The town celebrated as though the child belonged to everyone. Abigail named her Grace because she believed kindness had carried them through every impossible moment. When spring returned, Abigail finally traveled to the land her husband had left her. The valley was beautiful, with rich soil, clear water, and tall mountains surrounding it. Elias helped her repair the old property and build a strong fence. He trained horses while Abigail planted crops. What had once been an empty land claim slowly became a successful ranch. Years later, travelers crossing the region would often stop there for water and a warm meal. Above the barn, Abigail kept the broken wagon wheel from that terrible mountain journey. Whenever someone asked why she kept such an ugly piece of wood, she would smile and answer, "Because that broken wheel brought me to the place where my life truly began." The story of Elias Boone and Abigail Mercer eventually spread throughout the frontier. Some people remembered the gunfight, others remembered Virgil Cain's capture, but Abigail remembered something simpler. A lonely cowboy had seen a woman struggling on a dangerous road and decided not to ride past her. That single choice changed 2 lives, protected an entire town, and created a family where there had once been only loneliness. The lesson became clear. Courage is not always about standing in front of a gun. Sometimes courage is stopping your wagon when someone else is struggling. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can become the greatest turning point of your life. If you enjoyed this emotional Wild West adventure, make sure to like, comment, and share this story, and subscribe to Wild West Tale Stories for more unforgettable cowboy adventures, frontier mysteries, emotional legends, and powerful stories of courage, kindness, and hope.